Hi, in this video we're going to continue our discussion on the decimals. And the first thing we're going to do is to actually import the decimal module. And then from the decimal module, I'm also going to specifically import the decimal class. So technically, I don't have to do that, right? If I want to refer to the decimal class inside the decimal module, I can say decimal.decimal, right? And then provide the constructor or whatever we want. But I don't want to have to write decimal.decimal every time. So I am going to also do from decimal import decimal. That way I don't have to worry about it. There's other ways you can do that, but that's the way I just choose to do it. Okay, so now we need to talk about the context. Now the context is simply something that specifies certain properties that will affect how the decimals work. And in particular, the two that we looked at were the precision and the rounding. Now, in this point, I'm inside the module. I'm at the module level of the code. I'm not inside a function or anything else. So I can retrieve the current default context by simply saying decimal.getContext. So this is a function that is in the decimal module. And this will tell me what my current context is, which is my global context in this case. Right, so I've got a precision of 28, the rounding is half even, and we can change that. We can also get the precision specifically by saying get context.prec. So it just returns that value 28, and then we can do the same thing with rounding and return what the rounding is. And as you can see, it's just a string. Rounding is just a string. Now we can change those two values as well. We can do it by calling decimal.getContext dot precision equals maybe 6. Okay, and now if I do decimal.getContext again, then you can see our precision was changed. We could also change the rounding. So get context. And one thing, if you're going to work with the context a lot, then what you might want to do is maybe give it a name, assign it a name once and for all. Remember, get context just returns a context object, right? And the type of that object is a context, okay? So now I have that object. I have that global context or default context at this point. And now I can just say g_ctx. So instead of doing every time, decimal.getContext, I can just do it this way. It's a little shorter. And for the rounding, well, you could do this. You could say half round half. And if I can type, and maybe we want to change it to round half up. So that's one way of doing it. But of course, you got to make sure that you don't misspell the string here. So the decimal module also includes some predetermined constants like this, which will essentially be the same thing as the string, but we can do it this way. So just to show you that it is nothing more than just the string itself, we can do this and look at the type of that, which is just a string, and the value of that is just the string round half up. Okay, so that's how we can do it. And if we look now at our context, so we'll look again at our current context, we can see that the precision is still 6, and we've changed our rounding now to be round half up. So I'm going to go back and reset the rounding. So gctx.precision, set it back to 28. And I'll set the rounding back to round half even. Okay, so now if we look again at our decimal.getContext, you'll see that we're back to where we started. All right, so that's for the global context. That's actually for, in this case, it's the global context because we're at the module level. So I just want to point that out. GetContext returns your current context. So depending on where you call it, you might be getting a different context back. So let's take a look now at the local context. Now, local context is done by just calling the local context function in the decimal module. What it does, it will create a new context and return that. it creates a new context either from a context that you can specify as the parameter to this call, or if you don't specify it, it will just take whatever the current default context is, which in this case would be the global context. But it doesn't return a context. If we look at the type of local context, it says decimal.contextManager. If we look at the type of decimal.getContext, it returns a context. So local context returns a context manager, which means we have to deal with it just a little bit differently. So we'll use the with statement to work with the context manager. And what it means is that once we're done with this with block, that local context that was created will be disposed, right? It will get rid of it, it will get cleaned up, and it won't be around anymore. So with decimal.local context, I can type local context. I'm not going to specify a context, so it's just going to grab the default context as CTX. And let's go ahead and print CTX. Well, let's print the type of CTX, and let's print CTX. And you'll see now that CTX is a context, so that's what we would want to work with, and it has a precision of 28 and a rounding of round half even, which is exactly what we have in our default context. So let's go ahead now and change things up a little bit. Let's go ahead and say ctx.precision equals 6 and ctx.rounding equals, and right now our current is round half even, so I'm going to change it to be round half up. And then we're going to print CTX again. So as you can see, we now have a precision of 6 and a rounding of round half up. Okay, so we've changed that. And whatever, when we do operations here, we'll do operations using a precision of 6, and the rounding type will be the round half up. Now, I do want to point out though that if we do look at print decimal.getContext. Now getContext returns the current context. Well, what's our current context right now? It's this local context that we created. It is not the global context, right? So if we print that out, we'll notice that our context, that we get from getContext, is the local context, okay? Because we're inside this with block. And so our current context is the local context. It's the same as CTX, right? We can look at the ID of CTX and see if it's the same as the ID of decimal.getContext. And we should print that out. And you'll see that it's true. All right, so be careful with that. GetContext doesn't return always the global context that we have at the module level. It just returns the current context. If we're at the global level, it's the global context, and usually that's where we use it. So we usually get the global context back, but if you're inside, let's say something like this, then your getContext is going to be different, right? Because you've switched which context you're using. Right now we're using the local context, not the global context. Okay. So let's talk about rounding a little bit more, and let us use the round half up right now since we're in there. And let's go ahead and say x equals decimal 1.25, and we'll say y equals decimal 1.35, okay? And matter of fact, I'm going to define this above, because I want that available globally as well at the module level. So we have those two values, x and y. And let's go ahead and print round of x to 1 decimal point, and let's print round of y to 1 decimal point. And so we get that 1.25 rounded to 1.3 and 1.35 rounded to 1.4. This was a case where we had a tie, and we specified that our rounding mechanism should be round half up, and that's exactly what it did. Now, if we are no longer inside the with statement, right? Let's say we're out here and we print the same thing. So I'm just going to copy paste that. But now I'm going to print it at the module level. Well, what is our context at the module level? Well, the context at the module level is to round half even. And you'll notice that the 1.25 actually got rounded down to 1.2. We had a tie, so we rounded to the even choice that we had between the two. Okay, so that's how, when you work with local context versus global context, that's kind of the difference between the two. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.